Hey everyone, Luke here from Bedford Camera and Video, and I've got Mark from Nikon, and we're going to be talking about some new and exciting things coming from Nikon. So Mark, I want to give you a little bit of time to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are.
Hey guys, my name is Mark Cruz. I'm a senior product manager here at Nikon USA, and I'm here on your channel to talk to you about the new releases from Nikon that we announced last week, which namely is the Z6 II, Z7 II, and this is the launch of our next generation, next chapter of Z cameras. So let's get right into it, Luke.
Absolutely. And we're super excited. You know, since about 2 years ago, Nikon released the Z6 and the Z7. We're very excited to see the next generation in this series of cameras. So first off, tell me who this camera is designed for, both the Z6 and the Z7.
Yeah, well, if you look at our lineup right now, we are in a couple of months when these hit the market, we will have a total of 6 cameras in our lineup. 5 of them being full frame. I was on your channel, a couple of months ago talking about the Z5, and that was the entry point into full frame. We've had the 6 and the 7, which launched a couple of years ago, and now we have the second versions of those cameras. And what we did was we really addressed the concerns and needs of a lot of the professional community out there that thought that the specs of the Z6 and Z7 are exactly what they need, but there were some key hardware items that they needed to be addressed. Primarily the dual card slot and the compatibility with functional vertical battery grip, which we now have on this, including boosted buffer rates and faster frame rates. So I think in terms of who this camera is for, it's the higher end user that demands the performance of the Z6 and Z7, but to a higher degree now with the Z6 II and Z7 II. But as well as those hardware improvements that they need for redundancy and things like this. If they're shooting weddings, shooting events, they need the dual card slot. If they're using bigger lenses, they might need that vertical battery grip because they're accustomed to that. So I think this is really targeting those users that have a demand for all those additional needs that go over and above what the 6 and 7 offer. Having said that, the 6 and 7 remain in our lineup. That's the good news, and people can kind of just decipher whether or not these cameras have all the things that they want, or if for the price point that they're looking for, the 6 or the 5 makes more sense. So we'll talk about what's new in the 6 and 7 too. I just want to make sure I say that correctly. This is the Z6 II and the Z7 II. That's the way you say their names.
Perfect. So speaking about these new cameras, what is the actual resolution of the Z6 II and the Z7 II in both stills and video?
So for stills, the resolution for the Z6 II is 24.5 megapixels. So that's kind of what we used to call our all-arounder camera with the Z6. It maintains that same resolution, but this is truly a multimedia powerhouse. So it has ISO ranging from 100 to 51,200 ISO. Now, on the other hand, with the Z7 II, it's a much higher resolution. It's 45.7 megapixels. And again, that camera is for people that need that higher resolution. If they're shooting landscapes, shooting in the studio, commercial photography, they need every bit of resolution that they can get. And the ISO range starts at 64 now and goes up to a maximum of 25,600. So the versatility on the Z7 II means that you can shoot at maybe wider apertures in the brighter sunlight because you start at 64 ISO. But also there's a key difference in the sensor in that the Z7 II is such a high resolution, we've removed the optical low pass filter for additional sharpness. So in terms of the video, you asked about the video, both of these now will shoot up to 4K, and there's an option for 60p now as well. So on the Z6 II, that will be a firmware update released in a few months, early next year, and that will be 4K 60 at the DX crop, whereas the Z7 II will offer out of the gates when it comes on the market in December, a 4K 60 at almost a full frame crop. It's about a 93%.
Gotcha. So what are the actual frame rates as far as the photo side in the Z6 II and the Z7 II?
Yeah, glad you brought that up, because people that are looking at these products now will appreciate the faster frame rates. So from the Z6 II, we've boosted it up to 14 frames per second in continuous high extended mode, and that's up from 12 frames per second in the Z6. But what's more key there is that we've more than tripled the buffer. We've accomplished this with dual X-speed processors. So the main difference, one of the main differences between the second generation cameras is the inclusion of a second processor. So now we have two X-speed 6 processors, allowing us to get 3.5 times the buffer capacity on the Z6 II, all right? Whereas on the Z7 II, the maximum frame rate you can achieve now for a 45.7 megapixel camera, okay, is 10 frames per second. We can achieve up to 10 frames per second if we're shooting, again, in 12-bit RAW. So there's a couple of caveats there. It's 12-bit RAW and single focus point, but you can achieve up to 10 frames per second with a 45 megapixel sensor. Going back to the Z6 II, the frame rate at 14 frames per second, that's an achievement that we've only had before with our D6. So this is now approaching our pro-end sort of frame rates for full frame.
That's fantastic. So I did want to ask another question as far as the video aspect for the Z6 II and the Z7 II. What are the capabilities, if any, that are added to these cameras when utilizing an external recording device like an Atomos?
Great question. For those people that are, again, using this for multimedia video production, having an Atomos recorder externally gives us the ability to record in 10-bit. So internally, we're recording to the memory cards, either the CF Express or the SD cards in 8-bit, okay? And that can be in HD, 24, 30, 60, 120 frames per second, or the 4K options that I mentioned there. Now, if you go external, we have the ability to go to 10-bit, and that opens up N-Log. We have N-Log in these cameras now, as well as HLG, which is the hybrid log gamma, which is sort of an HDR format for people. So that opens up a lot of options for them, especially if people want to color grade. N-Log is key because it gives them a very flat profile that color graders like to use. As well, if you get our optional 12-bit ProRes RAW firmware update. It's a paid firmware update. You can do 12-bit ProRes RAW. What's new in these cameras is that we are enabling the ability to shoot now to Blackmagic devices. There's a couple of Blackmagic devices that you can get. Basically, you can purchase the ProRes RAW firmware update, but you will also get access to Blackmagic. So those firmware updates are coming next year, early next year.
Perfect. So what about the in-body stabilization performance on these newer generation cameras? How does it compare to the previous generation for the in-body stabilization?
The in-body stabilization is about 5 stops. When we're rating it with SEPA ratings with the 24 to 70 f4 lens, and that's consistent with the first gen of vibration reduction. But what's important is, again, for DSLR users that are looking at this format to possibly come over to, whether it's stills, whether it's video, you're going to get VR performance out of your F-mount lenses, regardless of whether they had VR built into those lenses. So the key thing here is that when you're using native Z-mount lenses, you're going to get 5 stops of stabilization, but what's more key, 5 different axes. So whereas on a conventional DSLR lens, you only have 2 axes of stabilization, up, down, left, right. Now you have roll as well as pitch and yaw. So the tilting of the lens, right? Pitch and yaw as well as roll, the sensor does those movements. When you attach an F-mount lens via the FTZ adapter, you're going to get 3 axes of stabilization. That's XY axis as well as the roll axis. So it's good news all around because today we have 16 native lenses for the Z system. When we launched the system, only 2 years ago now, we had 3 lenses and an adapter. It was mostly the expectation of people that they would adapt existing F-mount lenses as we built up the system. And boy, did we ever build it up in a short period of time. Today, we have 16 lenses, 2 teleconverters, and a mount adapter. And we cover everything from the wide angle to the telephoto, and we now have the 2.8 Trinity. As of last month, we announced the 14 to 24 2.8, and that rounds out everything from 14 to 24, 24 to 70, 70 to 200, which I have right here, by the way, all in 2.8. So you asked me at the beginning of the segment, who are these cameras for? I think the people that are shooting, professionally at more high end, and they demand those 2.8 lenses. Before, there was less of an impetus to switch over to mirrorless because you still had to adapt those lenses. Now you can all use these native Z glass, our S-line lenses, and have the full resolution edge to edge of this new Z mount. So I kind of strayed from your original question about the stabilization, but that's all part of the lens system that we have.
Absolutely, and that's not a problem. I think that was a great piece of information for everybody to know, is the fact that you do have a lot more options now than you did 2 years ago as far as the native mount lenses, which are fantastic. So what about the autofocus system in both the Z6 II and the Z7 II? How does this compare to the previous generation, and what type of subject acquisition modes do you have in the Z6 II and Z7 II?
Well, I'll mention a couple of upgrades that we've done to the autofocusing system, namely eye detect for both people as well as animals. So we've had those options in our previous generation. We've actually implemented them via firmware upgrades. They weren't available on the Z6 and Z7 out of the gates. We did some major firmware upgrade and enabled eye detect. What these cameras now have is eye detect and face detect for video as well, which was not on generation 1. So it's key now we have those available in video. What we also have is the implementation of eye detect within the wide area AF mode. Now this is key because in our previous generation of Z6, Z7, auto area AF, which is basically taking the entire frame into consideration when it tries to find the eye, was the only mode where you could use eye detect. Some people found that problematic because it would catch on to faces that you didn't necessarily want it to catch on. With the Z6 II and Z7 II, we now have a wide area AF mode where we can restrict where the camera finds an eye or a face within a red square around your frame, which you can move that red square around. So that's a key update we've had. We've improved the user interface so that we can access all of our auto area modes inside of the eye menu, and you can easily toggle through it with your function button. We've also improved the implementation of subject tracking. You mentioned before subject acquisition. We have a mode in there called subject tracking. You can assign it to one of the function buttons and easily replicate what many Nikon users commonly refer to as 3D tracking. So this is our sort of version of 3D tracking now in the mirrorless world. What's cool about it is in subject tracking on a Z camera, you can track the entire frame, 90% of the frame, whereas in a DSLR, you're relegated to where those focus points are right in the middle. So in terms of autofocus enhancements, there are several autofocus enhancements that we have in there, among other things from even to generation 1 that people might not be aware of, such as increasing or decreasing the speed of autofocus during video for smoother focus pulls. We can do those type of things. We can actually also adjust the erraticness of how quickly it picks up on a subject. So if your subject walks behind a pole or a tree or something like that, rather than immediately grabbing focus on that pole or tree, you'll track your subject as it walks behind obstructions and things like that. So it's very customizable. And I think people are going to find improved autofocus performances through these new features.
Perfect. So tell me a little bit about some of the new flash connectivity with the Z6 II and the Z7 II, as well as some of the creative features that are incorporated into these camera bodies.
Sure. I'll start with the flash. So we have had in the past an adapter to allow us to connect with our SB5000 via radio. We now have an update to that adapter, so we announced it at the same time as these new cameras. It's the WR11B. So this is an adapter. It simply plugs to the accessory terminal here at the side of the camera, and that's it. All you have to do is plug it in, takes no batteries. As a matter of fact, it acts as a tally light when you're shooting in video, so it'll light up when you're shooting in video. But the purpose of this really is as a radio trigger. If you have a WR-T10 remote control, you can remote control the camera, remote control the shutter release or starting and stopping of the video from further distances or through obstructions. But what's key is you can also use our SB5000 flash, which is both an infrared and a radio flash at greater distances, shoot through obstructions, also shoot in broad daylight, where previous infrared systems might get confused with the sun. This here operates very reliably in all sorts of scenarios because it's working on radio now. And again, this is the WR-R11B, plugs right into there, into the accessory terminal. Very sleek and elegant, and allows you to control your flash from the back of your camera. You don't need a commander here sitting on top of the hot shoe. What's more, you can also remote control several other cameras with this adapter. So if several of your Z cameras have this adapter, you can have basically a commander camera and remote cameras that will fire in conjunction with the commander camera. Or if you have a situation where you have two bodies on you and you have a setup with flashes, instead of having to pair each time, you can put this in what we call pin mode. And essentially you can fire off the same flash with two different camera bodies or three different camera bodies, as long as they're using the same pin number. It's a really elegant system, and it all comes alive with this little adapter. So happy to talk about that. You also talked about built-in creative features. Again, like I said, these cameras are a multimedia powerhouse. So they have built-in time lapse, and we've improved time lapses in here now because we can now do interval timer as well as time lapse at the same time. So meaning to say, you can shoot high resolution JPEG or NEF files, but at the same time as doing that, the camera will build an MOV file so that you don't have to pick between one or the other. We've also improved things like our built-in multiple exposure option. We've included new blending modes within the retouch menu when we were doing image overlay. Very customizable and very well thought out feature for this. So you can do multiple exposures and even have a ghost image appear when you take one photo and layer it on top of the next composition, so you know exactly where you're lining up your next shots. We also have things built in here like creative picture control. So it's picture profiles that we can apply to photos and videos and get really creative in terms of our color, contrast, hue. We have several different black and white modes, so I encourage people to take a look at that. And I will mention one more thing, and that is a focus shift shooting option, which is essentially automates your focus stacking for you. So a lot of people out there now are doing these hyper realistic, incredibly deep depth of field images that you simply can't accomplish just by stopping down the lens. You have to stack multiple images at several different focusing distances together in something like Photoshop or other third-party software. In the past, people would have to manually adjust it with their finger, moving the manual focus mode forward. We have the ability in camera to very precisely move the focusing in the steps that you choose and in how many different frames that you want. So that is a mode called focus shift shooting that we have built into these cameras, and as well as the 6 and 7 as well. So very many creative features.
That's awesome. And I did want to mention, like, that wireless transmitter for your flash unit is such a great addition to your camera system, especially if you're utilizing these cameras for event photography like weddings or whatnot, and you have a second shooter also utilizing a Z6 II or a Z7 II. You can be utilizing the same flashes set up throughout the event, but utilizing two separate transmitters. So it makes for a really good ecosystem for sure. Now, I do want to mention
something else on that note, Luke. Sorry to interrupt, but one thing that I like about the system is it doesn't need batteries. You know, prior systems that I had to remote control a flash, I'd need a radio adapter on this unit, which needed batteries as well. So you have to have that in your mind as you're going through your logistics, and then the adapter on the camera as well that needs its own batteries. This little elegant thing here runs off the camera batteries. So I just want to mention that as well.
And that's actually something good to bring up as well is how much battery usage is it taking away from the camera itself? Since it is powered by the battery internally in the camera, does it utilize a lot of juice to operate that?
In my experience, not a lot, actually, to tell you the truth. So I'll take that segue to talk about batteries. So in my experience, this has not been a battery drainer whatsoever. It's just, it works to trigger the flashes and your remote control cameras. So it's never had a big impact on battery. But now we're on the topic of batteries. I will mention that the battery in this has been improved as well. When we came out with the Z6 and Z7, it was rated about 310 shots per charge. Now we have new features such as a power energy saving mode here and newer batteries. So now this takes the ENEL15C battery, and we can accomplish up to 450 shots per charge based on SEPA ratings. And that's, again, SEPA ratings, real world ratings. Well, there are some of our ambassadors out there that are getting, honestly, 3,000 shots on a charge using the high speed burst mode. So I think people are going to be pleased with the batteries. Secondly, I think they're going to be pleased with the battery grip. This is what people have been clamoring for, and now you can have double batteries in here, basically improving the life of your camera to almost double. So it's about 1.9 times the battery life when you put in two batteries in here. And with this NB-N11 battery grip, we have hot swappable batteries. So you'll have one battery inside of the grip at all times, unless you remove the entire cartridge, the entire chamber. So you can remove the entire chamber and charge both batteries. But if you don't want to interrupt your video production or your time lapse and you want to start charging the battery, you can hot swap the first one, the one that's closest to the battery door. So that's good news. With this battery grip as well, the NBN11, you also have an option for a USB port right here on the battery grip. So what USB does in these new cameras now is it does something called USB power delivery. We can actually power the camera with a USB-C cord, not even draining the battery at all from any of the ENEL15 batteries that you might have in here. That goes for the body as well as the grip. So very excited about that for people doing what I'm doing right now, which is using my Z camera to do things like streaming or webcasting or things of this nature for long periods of time. I don't have to worry about battery because I'm powered through the USB port.
And just to make sure, you mentioned that this the USB-C port can charge and run the camera system via the camera body and the battery grip, right? So you don't have to have just the battery grip to utilize that constant power, right?
That's right. So if I didn't have the battery grip, right, I could also power the camera through the USB port on the camera itself. Charging, on the other hand, will require the camera to be off. So if you want to charge the battery, you'll have to use either the ENEL15B or C batteries, and the camera has to be off to charge it. But to operate the camera essentially indefinitely, you can do that with the camera on. It just won't charge the battery, but it will essentially bypass the battery and start operating the camera from the charge from the USB-C cable. It has to be USB-C on both ends. And the good news is for existing Nikon users that might have D800s, D810s, even D7000s that have the original ENEL15C battery, those are compatible with this as well. ENEL15, A, B, and C is all compatible with this, but only the B and C can be charged in camera.
Perfect. So tell me a little bit about the physical changes of the camera bodies. So what's different on the Z6 II and the Z7 II in comparison to the first generation?
Well, here's the good news, Luke. Not much other than an aesthetic on the front. And this is great because we've added a second card slot in here, and we did not increase the size of the body. We were able to maintain essentially the same size, shape, and weight of both Generation 1 and Generation 2. And this is important because people have already invested in things like underwater housings. I got this question the other day for their Z7, and they can now get the second generation Z7 II and use it. I use myself an L bracket, which is it's made by three-legged thing. It's a Zelda, and it fits perfectly to the ports, the side ports here. It gives me access to the microphone, the HDMI, etc. I can still use all that same accessory now, that bracket now on the Z7 II and Z6 II because it's essentially the same shape, same cut. So that's the good news. There really is no differences in terms of the body shape, other than the fact that when you open the memory card door, you will see a slot for an SD card. And then again, this is the utility of this is something that our customers have been asking for. We now have access to UHS-2 SD cards if people want to use their existing SD cards or have that backup redundancy. I'll also mention that with CF Express, this now is compatible with both CF Express and XQD. So you can continue to use your existing XQD cards, but what's great is CF Express is now here. These are 4 times faster than even XQD cards, which were already the fastest card in the market. And for the most part, they're almost the same price. So the value in CF Express cards is phenomenal. And we've gone with the Type B CF Express card, which means it's even twice as fast as the CF Express Type A. So I think we made all the right decisions in trying to outfit this camera with what customers are going to want and need. And as far as the size and weight goes, you can use your existing, some people might even have the battery pack that we had from Gen 1, which was the MBN10 hot swappable battery pack. It wasn't a functional grip, but it was a battery pack. You can use that battery pack on this body too, because it's the same size, same shape. The only thing that is relegated to Gen 2 is the MBN11, because this camera body now has contacts to communicate with the functional battery grip. So among the changes in the body, there are contacts inside of the battery chamber that allow it to communicate with this, allowing you to do things like adjust your shutter speed, your aperture, fire the shutter with the release trigger here on the grip. So that's probably the most relevant hardware change, is the inclusion of battery grip contacts.
So I do want to clarify something just to make sure. What media type is in each of these cameras? So is it CF Express Type B in both the Z6 Mark II and the Z7 Mark II?
Yes, so it is CF Express and SD in both the Z7 II and the Z6 II. So some people might have been confused. It was the Z5 that had dual SD. These cameras, Z6 and Z7 II, have dual card slots, but they're different cards in both cameras. So there will be one slot. The primary slot is CF Express. Secondary slot is the SD. And the great thing is that people can use these in several different ways. So under photos, if they're taking photos, they can have the secondary slot as an overflow mode. When one card gets full, spills onto the other, or you can have dual redundancy, which is what probably most people want that shoot events such as weddings or anything like that, where they only have one opportunity to get the shot. As well, you can even configure it to be RAW in one and JPEG in the second slot. But it's key for us to use CF Express Type B in these cameras, because that is really what helps us realize the buffer potential of these cameras. As I said before, we're talking about 3.5 times the buffer from generation 1, the Z6 and Z7. We now have 3.5 times the buffer. I mean, I'm talking about taking up to 77 shots at 45 megapixels, or I think 124 shots at 24 megapixels on the Z6 II. And we can achieve that both because of the dual processors clearing out that buffer quickly and the fast speed of the writing cards, CF Express, that equally empty the buffer very quickly. So all of it comes together to give these guys the buffer experience that they need and the burst that they need, especially if they're going at 14 frames per second or 10 frames per second in the case of the Z7 II.
And I think that brings up a really good point. So as far as the capabilities of these new cameras, what features may be slightly limited if you are utilizing just the SD card slot?
Yeah, one of those is really the buffer. So I think, and the operation of the camera, you'll find, or I found anyways, that when I used solely the SD card and I, just did kind of like a torture test and rattled off a whole bunch of shots, the green light indicator was on for a long period of time. And, you don't want to turn the camera off during that time because you don't want to, risk anything. But with the CF Express, I did 14 frames per second or 10 frames per second. And by the time I was done, I released my finger from the shutter release, or actually I maximized the buffer. The green light on the camera was not even on. It was finished writing to the card. So I'm very pleased about the speed with which CF Express in camera empties the buffer. That's the major increases. So even if you maximize that buffer to get started over again, the CF Express is going to give you major advantage.
Perfect. So now let's talk about some of the pretty relevant information for the end user here. What is the pricing and the availability for both of these cameras?
Yeah, so I mean, everything, we have this covered all the way from, you know, $1399 with the Z5 all the way to $3,000 with the Z7 II, and we have 5 different SKUs in that range. Body only, we're looking at $1999 for the Z6 II. We're looking at $29.99 for the Z7 II. So that's great because when we released the Z7 initially, it was a few $100s at launch, more than what the Z7 II is today. So the value in the Z7 II is very high. We also have an option to get it with the 24 to 70 VR f4, and both of these cameras will come with these kits, and these will have it at about $600 for that lens, which is a savings of about $400 if you were to get the kit, the lens alone. So you have significant savings when you get them together as a kit. And the availability for the Z6 will be first on the market. It'll arrive in November. The Z7 II will come in December.
So what about the battery grip and the wireless transmitter?
So the battery grip will be available at the same time as the launch of the Z6 II. So this will be $399. The transmitter that I showed you before, the WR-R11B, which you use to remote control your flashes and whatnot, is $199. And there's a second kit with it that you can buy with the remote control, the WR-T10, for $279. So, you know, for $70 more, you get the remote control. For $199, you get the remote transceiver, is what it's called.
So I know that a big question for a lot of Nikon users and a lot of camera users in general is, should I be investing in the mirrorless system in comparison to the traditional DSLR system?
It's a loaded question, but I'm up to the task. I tell you, Luke, I've been through this. I've been using the Nikon system for 13 years now. Obviously, I've started with the DSLRs, and now since 2018, I've gotten full bore into the Z system. Now, for people that are out there, I know just 2 years is a short time frame. There's been people on the fence and don't know if they want to leave their traditional DSLR. One of the main things that I think hold people back is how that digital experience is going to be through the viewfinder. It's very important for people to understand if they can get used to using an electronic viewfinder. There are many advantages. A lot of people talk about the size and weight of this, but should they be investing into this? I would say now is definitely the time, since we came out with this launch, because we have the full support of the lenses in the lineup, from everything from wide angle, like I said, to telephoto, teleconverters, prime, wide open prime. Like right now I'm using the 50mm 1.2 to shoot this. So we have exotic lenses in there. We have very practical lenses, and we have more on the way. So we actually have a roadmap on our website that shows 11 more lenses coming into the future. Super telephotos, macro lenses, coming out in a short period of time, 8 in the next year by the end of 2021. So by the end of next year, we'll have 24 lenses in the lineup. The reason why I think it's in 2020, now is the time to invest in the mirrorless system, is because of the glass. Some people might cite weight and size and video capabilities. That's all important, especially the video. If you're doing video, I think there's no other option than to get, from our lineup anyways, than to get say something like a Z6 II, or a Z6, or even a Z5. But in terms of the overall compelling argument, I think it's the lenses, really. It's what it is, because especially if you're shooting wide angle, our wide angle lens edge to edge gives us rendering capability that we simply could not achieve in the F-mount. And this is not dogging the F-mount. The F-mount is very good, and we have a large selection of lenses. And if you put them all together, if you get an FT-Z adapter on these Z bodies, you can utilize your existing arsenal of lenses, or many of the 90+ lenses that are still available from Nikon from the F-mount. I think it's great for people that want to do silent photography, which is simply not possible with DSLRs because of that mirror. And I think it's important for people that want to do things like creative composition, face detect to the boundaries of the frame. There are so many things that the Z system can do that DSLRs simply cannot. For me personally, I still shoot with a DSLR. I have a D780, which is essentially a Z6 sensor inside, backside illuminated, and allows me to do face and eye detect through the live view. That's our only camera that does that. But even if you don't necessarily abandon your F-mount lenses or DSLRs and want to get into the Z system, I don't necessarily think it's an either or. It can be a both, because the Z system can give you things that the DSLR can't. But I encourage people to go to Bedford's, to go to their local camera store and actually put it in your hands. Feel the dials, look through the electronic viewfinder, experience what you might not, which can't really see in specifications. And we even back that with our test drive program that we have for the Z5. So I encourage people to test that out as well. I mean, as long as you, like, for example, Bedford's has a rental program, I think they can utilize that test drive program and give people essentially the best experience and try to see if it's right for them, and then make that decision, make the plunge to invest.
A special thanks to Mark from Nikon for being here today with us. Do you have any closing remarks?
I'm just happy that we're now here in October 2020 and we have 16 lenses on our lineup, and more to come. And now we have generation 2 with battery grips and dual card slots and dual processors. Really excited for the general public to get their hands on these in a couple of months. So thank you, Luke, for having me on.
So there you have it. That's the new Nikon Z6 II and Z7 II. If you want to add this to your bag, go ahead and visit us online at bedfords.com or your local store. I'm Luke from Bedford Camera and Video, and we'll catch you next time.